Imagine spending more than 50 years loving the same person, building a home together, sharing ordinary mornings and difficult nights, and believing that no matter what life brings, you will face it together. Now imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the person you love more than anyone in the world no longer remembers who you are. This is the heartbreaking story of Alan and Trisha Meister, an American couple whose love endured one of life's cruelest challenges. Their story began decades ago in New York during the 1960s. Alan and Trisha were young. They had their whole lives ahead of them. Like many young couples, they dreamed about a future together. They dreamed of a home, a family, quiet evenings, laughter, and growing old side by side. Somewhere along the way, their relationship became more than romance. It became a promise. They eventually married and later moved to California, where they built their life together. For years, their life was filled with the ordinary moments that people sometimes don't realize are the most precious ones. Morning conversations, shared meals, little jokes, long days, quiet nights, arguments that eventually ended in forgiveness, and countless moments when one simply knew what the other person needed without having to say a word. Years passed, then decades passed, and while life changed around them, Alan and Trisha continued walking through it together. More than 50 years of marriage meant that Alan didn't just know Trisha's favorite things. He knew her expressions. He knew her voice. He knew the way she smiled when something made her happy. He knew when she was worried. He knew when she was tired. He knew the little things that made her feel safe. And then something began to change. At first, perhaps it was easy to dismiss. A forgotten word, a forgotten place, a question that had already been answered. Everyone forgets things, sometimes. But eventually the forgetting became different. More frequent, more frightening. Trisha was experiencing severe memory loss associated with Alzheimer's disease. The woman who had shared more than half a century of life with Alan was slowly losing pieces of the world they had built together. And Alzheimer's doesn't only take memories, it can take confidence. It can create fear. It can turn familiar rooms into unfamiliar places. It can make a person wonder where they are, and who they can trust. For Alan, watching the woman he loved disappear behind the fog of memory was devastating. But he made a decision. He would care for her at home. He would not simply walk away because life had become difficult. He would become her caregiver. And that meant learning things he had never expected to learn. Alan learned how to cook. He learned how to clean. He learned how to organize her days. He learned how to comfort her when she became frightened. He learned to be patient when the same question was asked again and again. He learned that sometimes the answer didn't matter as much as the tone of his voice. And perhaps most importantly, he learned that even when Trisha couldn't remember everything, she could still feel love. There were mornings when Alan had to help her begin the day. There were meals that had to be prepared. There were moments when she became confused. And there were nights when sleep didn't come easily. Caregiving can be exhausting. It can be lonely. It can test even the strongest person. But Alan kept showing up, day after day, morning after morning, night after night. He fed her. He held her hand. He stayed close when she was afraid. And sometimes, he sang to her. Think about that for a moment. After more than 50 years together, Alan was no longer simply the husband who shared a life with Trisha. He had become her protector, her caregiver, her source of comfort, her familiar voice in a world that was becoming increasingly unfamiliar to her. There may have been moments when she didn't recognize the house, moments when she didn't understand what was happening, moments when the woman Alan had known for decades seemed very far away. But Alan didn't stop loving her, because his love wasn't based on whether she could remember him. His love was based on everything they had shared. More than 50 years of mornings, more than 50 years of memories, more than 50 years of laughter, more than 50 years of simply being there for each other. And now it was his turn to be there for her. Imagine how painful it must have been for a husband to realize that his wife could forget his name, but he still remembered every chapter of their life together. He remembered the young woman he had fallen in love with. He remembered the wife who had stood beside him through the years. He remembered the person she had always been. And even when Alzheimer's changed what she could remember, it couldn't erase what Alan remembered. That is one of the cruelest things about this disease. One person can slowly lose the memories that define a relationship, while the other person carries those memories for both of them. Alan became the keeper of their shared history. When Trisha couldn't remember, he remembered. When she became afraid, he reassured her. When she became confused, he stayed calm. When she needed a hand to hold, he gave her his. And when words failed, sometimes a song could reach her. There is something incredibly powerful about music. Even when memories disappear, a familiar melody can sometimes create a feeling of safety. So Alan would sing. Not because it could cure Alzheimer's, not because it could bring every memory back, but because for a few moments, perhaps she felt safe. Perhaps she felt that she was not alone. Perhaps somewhere beneath the confusion, she could still recognize the feeling of being loved. And maybe that was enough. One of the most beautiful things about their story is that Alan's goal wasn't complicated. He didn't need to make every day perfect. He didn't expect Trisha to become the woman she had once been. He simply wanted her to feel safe. He wanted her to feel loved. He wanted to be beside her until her final breath. Those words reveal something about marriage that is easy to forget. The wedding ceremony may last only a short time. The photographs may fade. The celebration eventually becomes a memory. But the real meaning of marriage is often revealed decades later when life becomes difficult. Anyone can promise to stay during the good days. The harder promise is staying when the person you love can no longer give you the same things in return. When conversations become difficult, when routines become exhausting, when the future becomes uncertain, when the person you married needs you in ways you never imagined. That is when love becomes action. Alan's story reminds us that love is not always flowers and romantic dinners. Sometimes love is preparing another person's meal. Sometimes love is cleaning the house. Sometimes love is holding someone's hand through a moment of fear. Sometimes love is answering the same question for the 10th time without showing anger. Sometimes love is singing to someone who may not remember why the song matters. And sometimes love is simply staying when it would be easier to walk away. Years ago, Alan and Trisha had promised to share life together. They could never have, knowing exactly what that promise would eventually require. But when the hardest chapter arrived, Alan chose to live that promise. Not with grand speeches, not with dramatic gestures, but with small acts of love repeated every single day. That is what makes this story so powerful. Because Alzheimer's may have taken pieces of Trisha's memory, but it did not take Alan's love. And perhaps that is the lesson their story leaves behind. We often measure relationships by how much people remember about each other. Their favorite song, their first date, their wedding day, their anniversaries. But maybe love is deeper than memory. Maybe love is also what remains when memory begins to disappear. Trisha may not have always remembered the life she and Alan built, but Alan remembered it, and he carried those memories for both of them. He remembered the young woman from New York. He remembered the years they spent building a life in California. He remembered the laughter. He remembered the difficult days they survived together. He remembered the love, and as long as he remembered, their story was not forgotten. So if you are listening to this story today, and you still have the person you love beside you, don't wait for a perfect moment to tell them what they mean to you. Hold their hand. Ask how their day was. Sit beside them. Say, "I love you." Because one day, the little moments we take for granted may become the memories we would give anything to experience again. And if you are caring for an elderly parent, a spouse, or someone living with Alzheimer's, remember this. Your work may feel invisible. The world may not see the countless meals you prepare, the sleepless nights, The repeated questions, the fear you calm, or the tears you hide. But those small acts of kindness matter. They are love in its most difficult form. Alan and Trisha's story reminds us that true love is not only about finding someone who remembers every moment with you, it is about becoming the person who remembers when they cannot. And perhaps in the end, that is what, in sickness and in health, truly means. To stay, to care, to hold on, to love. Even when the memories begin to fade, because sometimes a person may forget your name, forget your home, forget your past, and even forget the life you built together. But love can remain in a hand being held, in a familiar voice, in a song, in a gentle smile, and in the quiet presence of someone who refuses to leave. Alan stayed beside Trisha because more than 50 years earlier, he had chosen her. And when life gave him every reason to believe that their story had changed forever, he chose her again, and again, and again. That is why their story is not simply a story about Alzheimer's. It is a story about devotion. It is a story about sacrifice. It is a story about the kind of love that does not disappear when memories do. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about someone you love. If they are still with you, tell them today. Don't wait. And if stories like this remind you of the people who made your life meaningful, subscribe to the channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that begin with once upon a time. They are the ones that continue even when the memories begin to disappear.